Aquinas' first three arguments for the existence of God, the arguments from motion, efficient causality, and contingency, are what modern philosophers would broadly label as cosmological arguments. The last two arguments are indeed somewhat different. The fourth argument Aquinas calls the argument from gradation, and it has unfortunately been badly misunderstood in modern times. The argument is stated by Aquinas in the following way, quote, "The fourth way is taken from the gradation to be found in things. Among beings, there are some more and some less good, true, noble, and the like. But more and less are predicated of different things, according as they resemble, in their different ways, something which is the maximum, as a thing is said to be hotter, according as it more nearly resembles that which is hottest. So that there is something which is truest, something best, something noblest, and consequently, something which is uttermost being. For those things that are greatest in truth are greatest in being, as it's written in the Metaphysics. Now, the maximum in any genus is the cause of all in that genus, as fire, which is the maximum of heat, is the cause of all hot things. Therefore, there must be also something which is to all beings the cause of their being, goodness, and every other perfection, and this we call God." End of quote. Perhaps the first thing we should notice about this argument is the fact that it rests upon the premise that things have varying degrees of goodness, truth, and nobility. Notice that these are, by and large, morally charged words, and Aquinas means them to be. It is crucial to understand that Aquinas is taking it for granted that the person hearing the argument will already believe that morality, truth, and nobility are objective characteristics about things or people. In other words, goodness, truth, and nobility are not just ideas in the human mind that we apply to things that we like, make us feel a certain way, or approve of. From this it follows that someone who comes to the argument without a prior belief that, when it comes to goodness, truth, and nobility, there is no objective fact of the matter, the argument will be entirely unpersuasive. This does not mean that Aquinas himself does not have an argument as to why, for example, morality is objective rather than subjective. It's just that this fourth argument for the existence of God presupposes those arguments. So let us ask the following question. Given that there is an objective standard of moral goodness, according to which we can rightly say that some people and some actions are morally better than others, does it follow that some thing must exist that establishes that standard? This seems to be the argument Aquinas is making. Even more provocatively, anyone who makes a claim about morality or justice, wittingly or unwittingly, presupposes the existence of some standard. What could it possibly mean to say that some law is unjust? Say, a law that forbids property rights to a group of people solely based on their race, if there is no such thing as justice? How could it possibly be true to say that such a law is unjust unless there were such a thing? And how could such a law be objectively unjust unless there were some such objective thing as justice to serve as an objective standard? To be sure, many will certainly object that, in order to meaningfully invoke justice, justice need not be an objective thing, but only a concept or idea in our minds. But that will clearly not do if our hope is to vindicate the claim that a racist law is objectively unjust. If justice is only an idea in our minds, what's the standard according to which the idea is true as opposed to false? Some other idea? But what is the standard for the truth of that idea? In order for ideas to have any truth value at all, there must again be some objective truth outside of the mind, according to which those ideas may be ultimately judged as true or false. Of course, many people today will simply deny that such an objective standard exists, in order to avoid Aquinas' conclusion. But then those same people will have to live with the fact that their beliefs about morality and justice have no objective truth value at all, and that there is, in fact, nothing objectively wrong with denying people property rights because of their race, or mass murder, unprovoked violence, or other such things. If this explanation of Aquinas' argument is reminiscent of Plato's argument for the existence of subsistent, eternal, and universal forms, you're not alone. As you may recall, we examined this argument in Lecture 3. Many scholars have, in fact, long considered Aquinas' fourth argument for the existence of God as the most Platonic of the five ways. In fact, the very argument about the truth of our ideas needing to be anchored in some objective being outside the mind is precisely what led Plato to suggest the existence of forms such as justice, virtue, and beauty. As he argued, how can it mean anything to say that something is beautiful, for example, if there's no actual thing as beauty? And yet beauty itself is not a beautiful thing, but that thing by which all beautiful things are beautiful. But Aquinas is not a Platonist. He did not believe, that is, in the existence of forms as Plato did. Instead of many forms that serve as the standard of goodness, truth, beauty, and other such perfections, Aquinas believes that God is sufficient to serve as that standard. In other words, God is the ultimate standard of all the perfections. And so when we notice that something is more or less good, more or less just, more or less noble, what that really means is that it more or less resembles the essence of God himself, who embodies all those perfections at once, and in whom all those perfections essentially amount to the same thing. This takes us into the subject matter of the next lecture, having to do with God's attributes. And so it should suffice to say that Aquinas' fourth argument for the existence of God follows closely Plato's reasoning for the existence of the forms, but posits God as a simpler and more plausible explanation for the same objective values that Plato was trying to explain. Let's now turn to the fifth and final of Aquinas' arguments for God's existence. In the Summa Theologiae, Aquinas states it as follows. The fifth way is taken from the governance of the world. We see that things which lack intelligence, such as natural bodies, act for an end. And this is evident from their acting always, or nearly always, in the same way, so as to obtain the best result. Hence it is plain that not fortuitously, but designedly, do they achieve their end. Now, whatever lacks intelligence cannot move towards an end unless it be directed by some being endowed with knowledge and intelligence, as the arrow is shot to its mark by the archer. Therefore, some intelligent being exists by whom all natural things are directed to their end, and this being we call God. End of quote. This argument is often called the argument from design, because it begins with the observation that, in nature, things act intelligently for an end or purpose, which are not themselves intelligent. For example, unless one suffers from a rare blood disease, one's blood will clot in order to prevent minor injuries from causing one to bleed to death. Likewise, a laceration in the arm, when properly bandaged, will eventually stitch back together, thus protecting the injured person's life and health. Now, my arm is not a rational being, and yet somehow it behaves rationally, for an end. Of course, I am a rational being, but I did not design my arm, and the bodies of many other non-rational creatures behave the same way. We know of many more examples of this kind of rationality in the natural world than learned people were aware of in even Aquinas' time. Especially in the realm of biology, we have countless examples of organisms and their parts operating in supremely rational and intelligible ways to achieve some purpose, usually associated with the survival of the organism. Consider, for instance, the process of cell division in early embryonic stages of an animal's life, which occurs with only rare and minor variation, according to the information or purpose supplied in that animal's DNA. Or consider the development of the eye, human or otherwise, that develops for the purpose of allowing the animals to see. In recent years, many scientists have detected the existence of design and purpose in the most basic constants of physical reality itself, such as the precise force of gravity, which, if either infinitesimally stronger or weaker, would immediately result in a universe incapable of sustaining life of any kind, human or otherwise. As Aquinas would likely argue, it follows from this that the rationality exhibited by these non-rational things in nature, or the physical universe, must be attributed to some other rational being. And the most likely candidate for this is God, the being whose existence as a first mover, first cause, necessary and perfect being was demonstrated in the first four arguments. There are a few common misconceptions of Aquinas' fifth way. First, Aquinas' argument is not making any special appeal to the complexity of the natural world. And in fact, his argument does not really have anything to do with complexity at all. To be sure, DNA and the human nervous system are extremely complex things. But in Aquinas' mind, what demonstrates that there's a supreme intelligence governing the way they act is the fact that they act with a purpose and according to design, final causality, to use Aristotle's term. Not the fact that the physical systems comprising them are so intricate or complex. If one could imagine extremely simple or non-complex natural systems acting with a similar purpose, the inference to God's existence as the source of rationality would be no less justified. Likewise, and contrary to a common misunderstanding, it should also be noted that Darwin's theory of natural selection really has very little to do with the specific argument of Aquinas' fifth way. Aquinas' argument is that, given the existence of purpose, design, or final causality in nature, it follows that some intelligent being must exist that explains that purpose and design. Of course, a Darwinian may argue that, in fact, what we think is our perception of purpose is really just an illusion, and that the natural world is actually governed by chance rather than by final causality. The only problem with this, of course, is that no Darwinian has ever even remotely shown such a thing. The most that can be said is that evolutionary biology has demonstrated that the material causes at work in the natural world are far more fascinatingly complex than previously imagined. But this does nothing to show that the natural world can be explained solely in terms of material causes. If anything, it has done the opposite. Citing the powerful example of DNA, Aquinas scholar Edward Feser points out that, quote, "What may be the greatest discovery of modern biology, DNA and the genetic code it embodies, which have been incorporated into the Darwinian story about the evolution of life, seems teleological through and through. Descriptions of this famous molecule make constant reference to the information, data, instructions, blueprint, software, programming, and so on, contained within it. And for good reason, since there is simply no way accurately to convey what DNA does without the use of such concepts. But every single one of them entail that DNA is directed towards something beyond itself as a kind of end or goal. The development of this organ in the growing organism, the manifestation of such and such a behavioral tendency, or what have you, and thus manifests precisely the sort of final causality that modern biology is claimed to have swept away." End of quote. So in the end, for Aquinas, the existence of God is the only plausible ultimate explanation for the final causality so evident in the natural world. Another word for this final causality is, as Feser says, teleology, since the Greek word for final cause is telos. As with the other arguments, no scientific discoveries of the modern world have given us reason to doubt either this or any of Aquinas' arguments. One may object to them on strictly philosophical grounds, but as we've seen, they have endured over the years, precisely because they stand up so well to all such objections.